All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining our second webinar about launching your indigenization journey. We are continuing the conversation that we started in August, and today we're going to be focusing on the indigenization journey within your organization. We will provide you with practical insights and actionable steps to help your organization embrace indigenization and expand on its capacity for growth. Today, we've got a panel that represents two organizations. We have International Indigenous Speakers Bureau, or IISB. IISB is creating opportunities for Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities to connect and build bridges by providing access to a wealth of Indigenous speakers and education around the world. We also have Riipen, a work-based learning platform helping educators, organizations, and learners collaborate on real-world industry projects to bridge the gap between education and employment. So far, over 40,000 employer projects have been posted on Riipen, resulting in more than 13 million hours of applied learning. At Riipen, we acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional and ancestral and unceded territories of Indigenous peoples across what is now known as Canada. In particular, our headquarters are located on the lands of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We recognize the deep history, culture, and connection that these lands hold for our Indigenous caretakers. We are committed to fostering an environment that honors the rights, perspectives, and contributions of Indigenous communities. As part of our journey towards reconciliation, we strive to build meaningful relationships with Indigenous peoples guided by respect, trust, and a commitment to listen and learn. We acknowledge the harmful impacts of colonization and the ongoing challenges faced by Indigenous communities. Riipen is dedicated to supporting initiatives that promote equity, access, and opportunities for Indigenous learners and professionals within our ecosystem. We pledge to integrate Indigenous ways of knowing and being into our practices and to work collaboratively with Indigenous communities to create pathways that are inclusive, respectful, and empowering. This statement, along with our land acknowledgement, is a step in our ongoing commitment to reconciliation. We recognize that reconciliation is not a destination, but an ongoing process of learning, growth, and action towards a more just and equitable future for all. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Throughout this webinar, please feel free to share your questions through the Zoom Q&A feature. All of our speakers will see your questions and we'll look to answer them. On behalf of myself, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Carly Coughlin, and I'm your moderator for today's panel. I am a project manager at Riipen. I live in Uxbridge, Ontario, which is on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Chippewa people. The land is covered under the Williams Treaty. I come from Dutch and British heritage and am a mother to 2 children. I'm a former collegiate athlete and now in my taxi phase, driving my children around to their various sports and nurturing their development. I'm passionate about managing teams and empowering individuals to do their best work. Now I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Media Sheikh Hassan, a strategic partnership and thought leadership manager at Riipen. Media has worked in higher education to support the collaboration between industry and academia while fostering innovation and research. She is also an award-winning social entrepreneur and Schwartzman Scholar with a background in sciences, engineering, and global affairs. Media, please say hello.
Hi, Carly. Excited to be here, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I'm happy to add a bit more information about myself before I pass it to Kathleen. So I have been with Riipen for the past 3 years, managing a lot of the strategic partnership and the collaboration work with diverse organizations, specifically to address the emerging workforce development challenges across Canada and beyond. I'm currently in transition between different physical location. Right now, I'm calling in from Ottawa, so the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. And I'm not sure where I'm going to be next week, but that's where I am right now. And I actually have moved to this country. I'm losing track, but I think it was 15 years ago. And I always say this that initially as a joke, but now it's becoming a reality. Is when I moved here at the age of 17, there were two things that we were never told about this country, which is the amount of the snow that exists here, and the second thing is the Indigenous people and a lot of the Indigenous history that we do not know as immigrants or people who moved to the country. So I have had the pleasure to get to know Kathleen and her organization and learn from her and always grow in this journey. So I'm really excited for this conversation. And now I'll pass it to you, Kathleen, to introduce yourself.
Well, I'll jump in first. I'm going to give Kathleen a big introduction.
Oh, please go
Well
ahead.
deserved. So, titled Kick-Ass Canadian, alongside the likes of Chris Hadfield and Clara Hughes, Kathleen Shannon Luditt has been honored by Harvard University, the Saskatchewan Legislature, and the Canadian Senate for her passionate acknowledgement of unsung heroes. As a Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal recipient, Kathleen understands what it means to go the distance. Whether running the Boston Marathon to commemorate Tom Longboat or running 100 miles in 24 hours to bring her grandfather's spirit home, honor runner Kathleen is not afraid of a challenge when it comes to ensuring Indigenous stories are told. Kathleen credits her family for her unwavering passion for bringing together different worldviews to building bridges for a better future. From her maternal grandmother, who was granny to all the children and cook to all others, to her aunt, who helped bring the Native Women's Association of to Saskatchewan and negotiated Indigenous seats at many industry tables, to her uncles and other relatives who also became the first in their fields and have ceasingly advocated for Indigenous voices and responsibility to the land. Kathleen has always been shown she was here to bring forward different perspectives and build bridges between worlds. Kathleen has always carried this generational passion in all aspects of her life, being the first female leak sealing technician in the world, proving women can excel in these spaces, being the first being the first female in an underground mine charged with everyone's safety and livelihood. Kathleen has always persevered to break new ground. Kathleen has over 3 decades of business and administration experience, including being the first Indigenous human resource rep for Saskatchewan's leading research and tech developer. Kathleen has built new paths where none lay before. If that weren't enough, her many years of honor running would also help bring forward many historical acknowledgements of unsung Indigenous heroes, inspiring many others to come together and follow in her footsteps. With her ancestors by her side and relatives inspiring her along the way, Kathleen's life and extraordinary experiences have been preparing for her to become the powerhouse mover, shaker, and heartbeat behind the first ever International Indigenous Speakers Bureau, IISB. Kathleen.
Lena Nasco and Carly, thank you so much. That introduction is quite lengthy. I don't know how much more I want to add, but I will say that first off, I just want to say tansay ni wagamaganak katatam skat na wakakyo. Kathleen Shannon Luditt Natsiga-san. Just really briefly bringing in one of the languages of my family, not only to honor them and to invite them into this space, but to also continue my journey of reclamation of that language within my own spaces. I introduced myself as Kathleen Shannon Luditt. Today I'm coming to you from the Secwepemc Nation, the territory of the Kamloops and the Secwepemc, and often referred to as Kamloops. I am an uninvited guest, but I am feeling very privileged to be in this space to join all of you today. I am also, to add a bit more in acknowledgement of my family, I am the eldest daughter of the eldest daughter of the eldest daughter in my family, and I am the eldest granddaughter. With that comes much responsibility and a privilege to be that. I am very grateful that my ancestors have, as the introduction stated, had a huge influence as to why I'm even here today, and the responsibility and the role that I play in the journey forward. So I'm very grateful to be in space with all of you. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and I'm looking forward to being able to hear from some other folks for where we may be able to offer some insights about our own journeys of to help them along their own. But as with everybody else here, I am a forever learner as well. So Nina Naskuman, hi hi.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for being here. I really want to kick us off from the beginning. What does indigenization mean? Why are we here talking about this, Kathleen?
Thank you, Carly. It's actually a really big question, but I will just kind of give my take on what indigenization means. To me, indigenization, with specifics to an employer or an organization, is really about making inviting space for Indigenous peoples and communities to participate in, as well as to create that space that allows us to create new pathways that haven't been there before, and where we can together explore what walking together can look like. And so for every organization, that's going to be a different journey. And it should be understood that way. And if anything, it should be embraced that it is going to be a different journey. But we'll get into talking more about what some of those familiar things can look like, and what some of those bumper guards could be. But when it comes to indigenization, it's really about an opportunity of expansion for an organization, not just to Indigenous people, but to their own capacity, and to what they can bring to the world. So I hope that kicks us off a little bit.
Wonderful. And Media, I want to bring you into this as well, as someone who is not new to Canada anymore, but came as almost an adult and have been on this journey. Do you have anything to add? What does indigenization mean to you in this journey? What has it meant to you?
Absolutely. It's wonderful to hear Kathleen's perspective, because it still resonates a lot with a lot of the things that I believe in. And to me, the indigenization journey is to actually being able to expand perspective and to be able to think beyond the stories that we hear or beyond the history, and try to really understand and build the empathy toward different populations and groups. And especially as a lot of the modern history of Canada still revolves around a lot of the historical events that have happened, to try to really understand them, understand the impact that they have on our life and society, on a lot of the systematic or the systems that exist right now. And there are obviously personal and both, organizational definitions and avenues to indigenization journey. But to me personally, it is the ability to really become a better human being, to actually understand the perspective of other individuals, to be able to connect, and to understand sometimes that the cause of certain issues that we see, and to really be welcoming to other demographics, other group, other people who might not necessarily look, sound, or believe in the same thing as you do, but being able to expand your perspective and your capacity to continue collaborating with other people and understanding their stories.
Wonderful. It sounds like, well, today we're really talking about Indigenous communities. When you talk about indigenization, or when we talk about it, it sounds like we're just relating to each other on a personal level. And understand, like, going beyond that business relationship, understanding who people are, treating them as the unique, valued individuals and with all the diverse perspectives and that they can bring to the table.
Absolutely. And to add to what you just mentioned, someone very wise, who I do not remember who exactly, told me once that we're human being, not human doing. So being able to connect to a person as a human being, a lot of when we think even about day to day and we spend most of our waking hours as adults working, we are trying to connect to individuals, and the transactions that are there actually built on trust and understanding of other human beings. So it's this idea of actually understanding another human being and being able to relate to them, and just to have almost put yourself in their shoe and their journey and understand what some of the experiences that they go through. So definitely to be a better human being in that process is the ultimate goal, in my opinion.
I love that. And how does that relate to? So we're talking here about indigenization as you an individual and a human being, and also indigenizing your organization. How do we look at that from the organization perspective? Why is that important to do?
If I can jump in on this one, I mean, there's so many elements and there's so many layers to what indigenization can bring to an organization. I mean, there's obviously the part that I think many people are aware of, that the unethical part, that it's something that needs to be done, and that's important, and that's important to acknowledge in an organization looking to walk that journey. But it is much more than that. Exactly as you talked about individually. I think a lot of times we think when we go to work, it's work and then we leave. That's not necessarily the case, especially when you are there X number of hours a day, or you're committing X number of hours a day to that work. It has a huge impact on who you are, what you do, and what you bring home to your own family. And when you're in that space and place, if it does not have space and place for everybody, that's also going to be felt within your own being, right? And so I mean, there's that one ethical aspect of making sure that we have space for everybody, but then there's also the economic aspect that comes in, and we'll kind of dive into that a little bit, but just making sure that we have space for individuals to understand that this is about you having opportunity to expand your own worldview, which you never may have had a chance to before. And yeah, I'll pause there because I'll ramble on a lot about that.
I'm happy to kind of add some of my my thoughts on the impact of this indigenization journey on almost like the business aspect of it, or the organizational capacity itself. And I think there are certain themes that have been emerging in the Canadian workforce that really aligns very nicely with the value of indigenization. One of them is the skill shortage and the lack of talent across the country. And even trying to look at indigenization from some of the most like tangible issues that many employers feel and sense now is the fact that we always look into avenues of, for example, skilled newcomers, or supporting student transition to employment. But we do know that Indigenous youth are the fastest growing population of young people across Canada. And we do know that we need young people to survive as a society, as a community, and as a workforce as well. So being able to embark on an indigenization journey means that employers are able to diversify their reach and their connections and understanding to quite a culturally rich youth demographic that has a lot of interesting ideas and thoughts and perspective to really solve a lot of the issues that exist in businesses, and to be able to kind of foster better connections, or as a technical term that's that's being used often, is almost build their talent pipeline and be able to support retention of that talent, and to address a lot of the issues that they might face, and to be able to access really vibrant, diverse, and emerging workforce that many people do not necessarily think about when they talk about the workforce. The other piece is on the Indigenous knowledge. And I know there is no shortage of example of how Indigenous knowledge can contribute to supporting businesses and the sustainability, being able to almost complement this Western view with a lot of the Indigenous knowledge, and try to understand how we can solve issues, while thinking about like the profit, the people, the planet at the same time, and try to actually build that comprehensive mindset to solve issues. And that does not come naturally to many of us. That only comes through collaboration and learning. So trying to be mindful and intentional about the indigenization journey, not to look into the impact on the revenue down the line, but to look at the impact on building better connections and collaboration with other entities, and almost having that growth in the social capital and the connections that comes with it, that will eventually support growing the business, or having innovative way to address issues, and to be able to, support Indigenous entrepreneurs and other peoples, and building ways that you can collaborate with them, have a partnership to advance almost a win-win-win scenarios where your business, the Indigenous community, and the entire society as a whole can win. That's another thing, that there are no shortage of examples, especially as I went through certain training recently relating to Indigenous data sovereignty, and they gave examples of how Indigenous knowledge addressed many issues. It was definitely eye-opening, and it wasn't something that I personally even knew about. So it helped me add or appreciate the value of having connections with Indigenous people. And lastly, I know I kept rambling on and on, is being able to actually build your own capacity as an employer, as an organization. So beyond just a person, but actually as an entity, how can you be more inclusive? How can you be more welcoming to different ideas and perspectives? How can you expand your knowledge internally to be able to solve issues and challenges in innovative ways? How can you really allocate resources to where you need the most, by actually making sure that we're able to resolve many of those challenges that are emerging in the businesses in an innovative way, and to try to address some of those challenges that keep emerging and changing as life is changing and emerging. So I'll pause here, but these are my views on indigenization when it comes to business specifically.
Well, I love that, and I think it's a great spot to kick off. Sorry to interrupt, Kathleen. One thing I just want to touch on and make sure that we get is, Media, you're absolutely right. There are lots of examples of the Indigenous perspective and how it's helped solve problems. Wanted to pass it to you, Kathleen, or Media. Can you share one of those with us, just so we can get a better understanding?
I think I could go down a whole scroll of examples, and some folks might have heard these before, but for those that haven't, I'm going to just share this. I think very early on in my life, when I became aware of the differences in worldviews and what it offers to solutions for all of us, I was probably in my early 20-something times around the sun, that I had heard from a project manager that I was working with about a project that they had worked on in a construction company, where they were called out to an experience where a newly built dam had just sprung a leak, and they were there to have to fix that. And they were there for about 10 days, or 7 to 10 days. And in that time, they tried many things to try and fix this leak. But the problem was they had to stop the leak before they could fix it. And back in those times, there was not much that everything they were trying wasn't holding up to the pressure, and it wasn't working. And so on about that 10th day, a local First Nation trapper from the area came by and asked what the problem was. And my project manager explained to them the challenge with the leak, and how every day the issue was getting more critical, that they had to stop the leak in order to fix it. And in that moment, he said that that trapper just kind of looked at him with a stunned look, and said, "I could stop that leak for you. I could stop that leak for you in a day." And my project manager at the time thought, well, what could he do? We've got engineers from Germany and everywhere else. What could he have to offer? And so he said, well, we're all ears if you've got answers. And like that, the trapper didn't say anything. He just turned around and walked away. And so my project manager thought maybe, he called him on a bluff, until the next day, when the trapper came back, and he came back with some beavers, and he threw them in the upstream of the dam. That leak was stopped within a few hours. When my project manager shared this story with me, I come from a trapper family. And so when he shared this story with me, it hit me in a lot of different levels. One was, first off, that his new reverence for Indigenous people and the knowledge that we carry, the different ways and the different worldview that we have, that we can see solutions others can't. It was really, it took me back. The other thing was that I realized that we know things that are not necessarily obvious to other people. And what could that mean if we were in the same space, in the same place together, trying to find solutions? And then lastly, of course, I was kind of taken back by, wow, imagine the resources, the financial resources, the economic impact that would have been, significantly changed if they would have just had a local Indigenous perspective there in the space. And so that is just one teeny tiny example of how massive that can transform an organization in a moment, from their own capacity and to their own ability to solve something, if we can make space for Indigenous worldview within those places. But again, I got a whole scroll I could go down of examples of that. And it benefits everybody. So
That's fantastic. I think we talked a bunch about um, how it's beneficial to the economy, what it could look like for businesses. Also wondering, what does it mean when you make space for Indigenous communities and individuals? What impact does that have on Indigenous community and Indigenous individuals as well?
if I can pipe in here again, I want to offer an example for myself. I always say that I'm a CCAB or CCIB baby, which means Canadian Council of Indigenous Businesses, formerly the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Businesses. I had the privilege of growing up in Treaty 8 territory, often referred to as Fort McMurray. And that was one of the first communities that the Canadian Council of Indigenous Businesses had the chance to work with stakeholders in the area on indigenizing their organizations. And growing up in that environment, I got to experience what it was like before and what the outcome was afterwards. For those particular stakeholders, they were charged with not just educating themselves about Indigenous people and people of the area that they were coming into, and that they were having the privilege of being able to work in that environment, but they had to create new policy within their organization. They had to make shifts and changes, not just with hiring and making space and ensuring that they were hiring Indigenous people so that there was adequate representation, but they had to change the way that they operated as a whole, right down to their vendors. All of their vendors that wanted to be able to work with them had to also have their own indigenization policy and practice within their organization. And so that ripple effect really had some massive impact in our communities. And as an Indigenous family alone, one of the things I remember, even my own grandmother advocating for it, was making sure you get your grade 12, make sure you go and get your GED, make sure that because then you can get a job with one of these folks that are right here on our lands. And also because we knew that there was space there for us. We just had to fulfill this other requirement, because of course, one of the challenges that we have in our communities has to do with education levels. And I don't say that as that being an Indigenous thing. For me, it's about how the education system doesn't right now serve an Indigenous way of educating. And we're still dealing with the fallout of residential school and the impacts of that. But as a result of growing up in that community, there's not a single family member of mine that was not impacted by this organization, by these organizations that took their indigenization journey and continue to this day, and created policies that there was no exception, that if anybody wanted to work with them, they also had to be taking the journey. When you are a stakeholder or somebody that has influence on other organizations, you have an ability to be able to make an immediate shift that many don't realize. And it's simply just being committed and dedicated to that can actually have that ripple effect. When I left Fort McMurray and I came to other places, I was actually a little bit culture shocked, because I had grown up in that environment with the expectation that there was space for me and there was space for others. And that was not the case when I left and went to other communities. I guess you could say it's part of the reason why I'm here today. It definitely fueled the fire in making sure that that needs to be the norm, not invisibility. So I'll pause there for now.
It's also sounding to me, between what media was talking about we have a skills shortage in Canada. We also have Indigenous youth that's the fastest growing population. it sounds like if your business is not going along this journey, you are shutting that door to that growing population that can fill that skill shortage. So looks like we're hitting a time where it's becoming a necessity as part of your business. To be able to continue to do business in Canada and grow and have access to those skills, it's a really important journey to take. And from my experience, it really is a journey. It's not something where I get my certificate and I can check it off and say we are certified. It is ongoing learning and collaboration and adjusting, and it's just been wonderful to go through that. And I'm excited, and hopefully we're inspiring some others today.
Mm.
And if I were to add to what you just mentioned, Carly, I think there's something very important in what you just talked about, the fact that it's a journey. It's not, one step or one event that you attend or one webinar or one book you read and that's it. You understand the concept. It is a journey, and there will be a lot of moments where you're faced with reality that you probably did not want to know about, or historical events that could be shocking or that makes you question a lot of things that you do day to day. But it's the journey at the end of the day, and most importantly is being able to be comfortable with the unknown and to be able to embrace making mistakes and learning how to fix them. I think every time I talk to Kathleen, I tell her, like, please do correct me if this is not accurate or not proper, or if I should do or say it differently. And just because it's a journey and a learning experience for all of us. We can't change history, but we can definitely change the future, and we can change how we perceive a lot of these elements. And one thing that was just mentioned is this ability of being more inclusive and accessible, and the impact that has on communities. And just to hear Kathleen's story and how the entire community was impacted by this. I'm going to bet that there was so much benefit in both sides, and those businesses have benefited access to fresh insights and ideas that no one else in the community or that region was able to access. And they were able to have almost probably really high retention of those workers, and being able to build and foster those relationships with them that goes beyond just like an individual that worked with you, but it's the community as a whole. So I know one thing that I definitely admire in a lot of the Indigenous thinking, based on what I learned up to date, is their perspective to community and the timelines, where they always think about generations and the back and the future. So they always think about not the impact of the work that we do day to day, which is typically what we do in the Western mindset, where we think of the next quarter and the next KPI and the next measurement, but we don't think really what impact this might have on our environment, community, society, growth 10 years down the line. And are we doing things now that will harm us or help us? So those are a few things that I think, just like embracing that level of new perspective and ideas and be welcoming to them alone does shift almost the brain capacity to understand a lot of concepts and to be able to really take on more information, ideas. I know in my move the past few weeks, I had to give away so many books, and one of my neighbors is working in the space of tech, and I told her, like, oh, you should read the book of like 21 things you don't know about the Indian Act. And I told her, like, especially where you used to live, there's a lot of Indigenous communities that you will come across. So at least you starting somewhere will help you understand a lot of things down the line. And I told her, I was like, guess what? This book is going to make blood boil in your veins, but that's okay. That's part of the learning. That's part of the understanding. And I remember we had a very lengthy conversation about this topic and how it impacts us as individuals and people that live here, but also as workers and as people who contribute to the economy and everything else. So that's what I wanted to add. I'll pause now.
Thank you, Media. I was just gonna, if I can add a bit to that, I mean, I think one of the first things that I would say to everybody is to understand that Indigenous communities are relational first. We're in a society that often is much more transactional, meaning that no relationship is necessary. It's just about let's get a task done, or let's check a box, or something like that. And although that can be helpful in some spaces, when it comes to working with Indigenous communities, it won't be. Relational means that you really have to be intentful about making a relationship. And so, as Media and Carly have been talking about with regards to collaborations, and have you gone out and introduced yourself? Have you shared why you are in this territory, what it is that you're looking to do? Have you intently gone out and asked, different communities of how they could participate, or getting to even know them a bit about what it is that they do? Have you made those intentful opportunities happen for your organization? And if you haven't, start now. Start now. It's not something that you necessarily will be finished overnight, as any relationship you would hope wouldn't be. But it is one that when you start cultivating it, more options become available to you. But you have to be, it's sometimes like walking into the dark. You don't necessarily know what's on the other side, but your willingness to go to the other side is what's going to really fuel you forward. And so with that, I would also say, when you are thinking about your indigenization journey, I know there's a lot of buzz in different places about doing it, and people want to do it because they want to do the right thing, and that is fantastic. But what I would say to you is, get really clear about your why. Why do you want to do this? Is it to just check a box? Or is it to know more? Is it to be more? Is it to include more? Ask yourself and get really clear about that, because when you come into our communities, that's going to be what they're going to want to know. Why are you here? Why are you here? Are you here to just pass through? Are you here to create a relationship? And that will make all the difference in the world about the participation that you'll receive, about the engagement that you'll receive, and about the assistance that you'll receive from Indigenous communities. So just as Media talked about, we have so many solutions to many of the challenges that we have in the world, from climate change, food security, you name it. But they can't be accessed through a Western lens. They have to be accessed through a different type of lens. And that lens requires you to spend time with us, to be able to see through what we can see and what we know to be. And when we come together and when we can walk together that way, now we're in that journey of creating capacity for everybody. But we have to take those first steps first. And that why is probably the most critically important piece of it.
Yeah, and I can add from a Riipen perspective. So, and talk a little bit about my journey with Riipen and working with you, Kathleen, is I know that IISB has had a relationship with Riipen for a very long time. And like any of these collaborations, there will be ebb and flow as we find our way. I joined about over a year ago, I believe, and you introduced indigenization to me. And where I started, it wasn't about Riipen yet. It was about me. I need to understand before I can bring it to my organization and help demonstrate how it's beneficial for Riipen as a whole. So for those of you that may not be the CEO of your company, may not be decision makers, I love that you're here. If you're here, you know that there's something important here and you want to learn more. You as an individual can start out by just learning. Find an Indigenous community, and as Kathleen had spoken about, express your intention. Why are you here? What are you trying to know? And just start from there. I think one of the things that has been eye-opening for me is I am a project manager at heart. When I fall asleep at night, I've got a checklist of all the things I did accomplish. I didn't accomplish, and what I need to do tomorrow. That is not how this is going to be successful. So it was a complete mind shift for me that when working with IISB, we don't have an ultimate goal at the end, and I don't have steps exactly of how to get there. It is a building of relationships, seeing where it can go and exploring, and it has just been one of the most fulfilling journeys for me, in expanding my own perspectives, in understanding. I am also now, and it takes some time, but a year in, am able to help benefit Riipen as a whole as well. I feel so lucky that I've learned so much from IISB and my own research on things like Indigenous data sovereignty. Now I'm at the place where I understand and I can start flagging concerns before business decisions are made. So I can start to flag that before we're already going down a path and then we have to course correct. Um, Able to help drive where our business goes by demonstrating the relationships that we have and what we can do with that. It's very cool, and I'm very proud to say now, over a year in, I can start to make real impacts in the business.
Can I add something to what you just mentioned, Carly? And I agree with everything you said. It's like you almost become an advocate to a lot of these topics and ideas subconsciously. So even you might not be in a leadership position where you can influence change top down. You can be that voice of change to really make everyone accountable and to make sure that everything is on the same page. And I think there's a fascinating phenomena that happens where if you worked with any vulnerable population or indigenous community globally, so I have done a lot of work with indigenous communities across Africa specifically, and it is fascinating where there's so many similarities with understanding like indigenous knowledge and how they have those solutions that do not come across anybody's mind. And I have seen this issue often and often, which happens everywhere, including Canada, where someone from outside the Indigenous community will go approach them with a solution and giving them like a solution that they think works best when it's not really the case. So when I worked with a lot of the Indigenous youth across Africa, it's always like, how can I help you? Or how can I support you in that process? Or how can I use my own connection, knowledge, resources to really help you use your own internal knowledge and expertise that you have to solve the issues that your community knows about, that you're the expert in. And that's when it was really eye-opening to me, because when I shifted that question of from like, oh, I have a solution for your issue in your community, to how can I be an advocate? How can I be a supporter? How can I be someone who's learning in this journey to really foster those lifelong connections and relationships with a lot of these youth? I still keep in touch with them till now. And this was like pre-pandemic, so it feels like centuries ago. To be able to still learn from them and explore the work that they do. And it was incredibly fascinating to see how they took some of the knowledge that I shared from them, from my own experiences, and they almost customize it to what works best for their community. And it's definitely was a wonderful journey for me, but also a huge learning opportunity. And I think Kathleen mentioned like knowing the why is quite valuable and important. And when you approach it with that lens of actually wanting to learn and wanting to grow as a human being, it becomes near impossible to not become an advocate and a champion down the line. It just becomes something that is ingrained in your DNA and like a bug inside you that will show up and come up in places that you do not expect. But that's how we all collectively can induce a change. So sometimes people might think that we might be in an entry-level position or a customer success role, or we're not necessarily in a leadership position, but you can take some steps to approach a lot of these topics with understanding, with the willingness to talk, and to be able to also hold your own organization accountable for some of their mission and goals, and to try to question, well, how are we supporting building better relationships with Indigenous communities if we want to be an inclusive organization? These are a key fabric of the community. So how can we truly become inclusive and leverage our own resources to be better human beings, but also a much stronger and a well-expanded organization in terms of capacity and knowledge?
Wow, there's so much in there that I just, oh, I love it. This is fantastic. And thank you, Media, for sharing all of that. I think a couple of things that I really just want to emphasize to folks is we all inherited this history, this today that we are at right now. And from a personal level, just as Carly said, there's a personal journey that's also included in this. So as an organization, recognizing that everybody in your organization, every part of your human resource, they have their own personal journey to take on this. And how are you as an organization supporting that? Because when they do get that opportunity to take that journey, you're going to inherently benefit. You're going to benefit from their understanding, their capacity to be able to see things that were probably invisible before, and the ability to build relations that are going to be extremely valuable to you as an organization. And so how are you making space for that in your organization? That's a real critical piece. The ones that can build relation are going to be of utmost value to you in your journey forward. I would also say that you know, I sometimes say to folks, I'm like, if I told you there was a library with answers and solutions to all the problems that you're dealing with right now that you had no idea, and it's like right here, right in front of you, would you not want to see it? Would you not want to be able to have the opportunity to engage with it? And I think for most people, the answer would be yes. But if I added to that and said, the only thing is, in order for you to be able to engage with it, you have to have a relationship with it first and be invited in. And would that change how you went about things? It likely should, and it likely would, but hopefully it wouldn't change your desire to know more and to learn more. So I would say that when you're thinking about indigenizing, when you're thinking about taking that journey, embarking in, or even if you're already on it as an organization, is take a look at how you're looking at that journey. Are you looking at it as a checkbox at the end of something that's done? That can be a way, but I will say it's probably one of the most limiting ways you can approach that journey. If you take a look at it as wow, I'm going to get the opportunity to expand both personally and our organization in one way, and also for my generations to come, my own personal generations and all others that I know, and to really bring something pretty significant and important to the world, I feel like that's a better fuel to fire you forward. So yeah, just to kind of consider that.
One of the things that I think is so important and so key to this that we've been dancing around a little bit, the part we haven't danced around is the relationship. That such a key, important piece to indigenization is building strong relationships. In order to build strong relationships, you need to build trust. In order to build trust, you need to have be vulnerable, which is not something that is intuitive to Western culture in business. I'm wondering if either of you can expand on that a little bit, and how have you navigated that? Or Kathleen, from your perspective, how have you found people navigating with you of learning how to drop their barriers that they have up?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. I like that one. Well, the first thing that I would say to folks is relationship is not a passing in the elevator. It is an intention to stay in it for the long haul, to understand that there's going to be differences in the way that you see things and that the way that you experience in a moment. But growth together means literally being able to expand together and to take in new. So be willing for that. Be willing and embrace that there might be some messiness in it. That's okay. That's okay. I would also say that indigenization is not just a one-sided. It doesn't mean just that organization that is coming in, primarily a non-Indigenous organization that's trying to indigenize. It's also a journey for Indigenous people, because we have to enter a space that exactly that of can we trust, can we be in space, will they be here for the long run, are they willing to be there at the tough spots, because we have different worldviews on things, and when we come together with those worldviews, it might clash at first until we find what is that path forward together. One that media alluded to that I'll just kind of give an example of is in my culture and in my upbringing, we talk about 7 generations, and it's actually not 7 generations, it's really 15, because we talk about 7 generations to come, the 7 generations that came before, and then you count our generation, that's really 15 generations. And what that alludes to is the fact that whenever we're making a decision or we're thinking about something for the long run, we're thinking in a timeline of 150 to 300 years. And I always say to folks, I really appreciate quarterly, annually, 5-year, 10-year, even 20-year projections. But that's a drop in the bucket into the worldview that we are looking at. And when you are looking at different time lengths like that, you're asking different questions, and different things are of more significance than what might be in those shorter timelines. And so if we can come together in those two spaces, and not saying one is right and one is wrong, is recognizing that we have access to both. How do we create this that we can walk together now, and we can both benefit from this journey and this learning exchange from each other? So as an Indigenous person and an Indigenous organization, there's a lot of patience we have to have, because for a long time we've been invisible. And same with our worldviews. A lot of people are not aware of it, mostly because they didn't even know the history that was really here, and they're just beginning that journey of learning. And so we have to extend patience. Recognition of that is really helpful, for sure, but at the same time, it's a learning exchange for us to learn a different way of being. So I hope that kind of helped, but I'm happy to. Media's probably got some good insight there too.
I was so impressed by what you said, Kathleen, that I lost track of the question. And if I'm not losing track of it, Carly, you asked about how to be like vulnerable in this journey and this process.
Yes, and how to transition from kind of what the Western culture is of leave your personality and yourself at home, how to dive into that full force and be vulnerable.
No, I definitely have not your average answer to this, because when in my early 20s, when they tell you you don't know what you don't know, I took that quite literally, and I went and I have done stuff that now I look back, I'm like, I have no idea how I did them. Where I worked with a lot of projects globally, and I led not-for-profit that made prosthetics specifically for communities in extreme poverty and refugee zones through 3D printing, so a lot of the affordable solutions. And I was exposed to a lot of vulnerable scenes and situations when you talk about people, especially children, escaping war zones and losing a limb because of this situation or because of extreme poverty, and being able to, especially at that age when I had like little to zero knowledge about global affairs or politics at that time, to really be exposed to how a lot of these historical events, specifically, and most of my work was across the African continent, and we look at the modern cultures in a post-colonization where there still is a form of modern economic colonization, but not necessarily day-to-day form of colonization. You kind of to me, I always made like assumption about a lot of these stuff, and I would tell people like, oh, why are you not solving this problem this way? Or why are you talking about this issue still, without really understanding or having that vulnerability to understand the other side. And I think I was young enough where I made those mistakes, and everyone around me was generous enough to walk me through the journey and to understand. But definitely looking back at some of the things that really helped me to be vulnerable in a lot of these conversations, and to be willing to understand the other side, is to truly understand the perspective of the other side and listen to the stories to understand them, not to defend or answer, which is something that all of us do subconsciously, and we're ready to answers immediately. Or if someone tells you a story, I'm just going to pick an example. If you meet an Indigenous person and they tell you about the challenges they face in the post-secondary institution, many people immediately want to jump and to tell them, like, no, why don't you do this instead? Without really asking them, like, why is that? Like, what happened? What challenge you faced? And just try to really understand the perspective, and to not judge the situation, and not to try to jump to solutions, but to understand their perspective, what they went through, which is actually a muscle that I think people need to almost train in their mind, and to let their ego or their perspective or their privileges aside for a second, to listen to what that person went through, and to ask themselves, if I gone through the journey they went through, if I have, growing up in homes where our um, parents or grandparents have gone through the residential school and have really faced a lot of abuse and challenges, have been stripped away from their cultures, and now they have their own issues to deal with. So me as a child, I'm not able to comprehend any of these issues. Will I be the same person I am today? Most likely not. And I'm impressed by the resiliency in the Indigenous community to be able to continue thriving and to try to like address a lot of these issues, but to be able to actually understand these issues without trying to feel guilty or try to answer to defend or try to give them solution, but just to respect the space that they're giving you, to be able to listen to these stories, to be able to put yourself in that human being place and to see if you were in the same journey as them, you probably would be much worse than they are in life. And they are a lot more resilient and they have strong community and familiar relationship that does not necessarily exist in a traditional Western society and culture. So just to even be able to understand their challenges, but also appreciate the strength that that community have alone will help you be able to almost like enter this journey and start it with an open heart. Because these issues and topics are not easy. And you might feel like you would rather not hear about some stuff and hear for other, but you need to be willing to listen to everything and to understand what's going and not to judge and not to try to answer and defend, but just listen to understand. So that's my answer, but my journey has been quite untraditional or unconventional. So that's kind of my biggest personal reflection and learning about how to approach any vulnerable situation, regardless of what it is, but mainly with the Indigenous people, with an ear of understanding and respect, without having to judge or answer or defend anything.
Thank you.
Inanaskuman media. Sorry, I just want to say thank you very much for that. That's very, as an Indigenous person, I appreciate you passing that on, and there is much that I hope people take from what you've just shared. I think there's that expression, you get what you give. And when it comes to an organization and to individuals, if you really want more, invest more in the relationship, invest more in this journey, invest more and know that there is more on the other side. There's some powerful resources that we're going to leave here with you with, and having to do with, I mentioned the Canadian Council of Indigenous Businesses, or some might know it as the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business, which what their name was before the story that I shared. I cannot stress how impactful that was for myself, my family, the entire community of Fort McMurray, and what was considered norm and what still is considered norm up there as far as an organization, your commitment to engagement and making space and ensuring space, whether it is making sure your vendors have their own policies and practices in order for them to be able to work with you, to show your commitment and to have that ripple effect, or making space that you are working with Indigenous businesses and making sure that they have that space to be able to operate. You got to remember, we don't come from generational wealth at all. We come from a space where in many places we can't even get a loan simply because we live on reserve. There is a lot of things that you may not be aware of, but if you as an organization can be intentful with your why, is why do you want to do this? If your why is about being a good human, if your why is about knowing that at the end of this, all of us are going to be better off, that's probably a stronger fuel than a box to be checked. So just a suggestion on that, for sure.
No, I think that's wonderful. And with that, we are at time. But I do want to give the chance for us to answer a couple of questions. So for those who have joined us, attendees, please add any additional questions that you have, put them in the Q&A. We have a few minutes now to answer them. In starting that, let's see where I'm going to start with. Okay, we have a question. How to change training to build knowledge and skill about your business with younger generation Indigenous people?
Well, first off, if you haven't already, maybe making sure that you are connected to of course, whether you've got an Indigenous elder there or an Indigenous representative that's working within the community of whatever youth it is that you're working with, it's important to have them there. Not just as ones to advise on the training, but ones to make the relationship with the youth. Again, it's the same thing with our communities. You know, if you make relationship with them, they're more likely to come to the table than getting a cold invitation to some place. And so that's one part. The other thing is to ask them. They may not answer right away if your space is not cultivated for them to be able to feel safe and to feel welcomed. But if you're working with somebody that understands what that requires, they'll be happy to share with you some of the things, and you'll be amazed at what you can learn from them. I think a lot of times we think it's a one-way transmission of here, we're going to give you, but in reality, they have a lot to give back as well.
Thank you. I'm going to do, I think, one more here. How to incorporate more matriarchal and Indigenous values into how we function and build as a team in business.
Well, I guess the first thing to say is involve matriarch in your organization, involve matriarch in every single element of your relationship building or your organizational spaces so that they can bring a vantage point that we have Indigenous that has been, invisible in general, but when it comes to the matriarch who are absolutely essential in our community, and we would probably say in every community, there's another layer of invisibility, and the matriarch really do have a completely different, another layer of lens that needs to be brought into organizational spaces. We're seeing the impact in the world today of the lack of that, whether it's Indigenous or not, of having that feminine presence and having that vantage point and the difference that it can make. The story that I shared with you about the dam is just one example of having a different lens come in will change the opportunity and the possibilities for everybody in there. So make sure you have matriarch in your spaces.
Wonderful. And with that, Kathleen, Media, if there's any final messages that you want to pass on.
The only thing I would say for anyone who is joining us live or might watch the recording at any stage, if you have any question or you're not sure where to start, feel free to get in touch with us or ISP. We're all in this journey together, and we will be happy to share our learning and any resources or any recommendation to places where you can start. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Media. And I agree. Yeah, we are all in this journey together. And I think one thing that I will say is don't be afraid of not knowing. Don't let that be a barrier in you moving forward in this. If anything, embrace it. Embrace the not knowing, welcome it, anticipate it, and allow yourself to hit the bumps in the road and say, you know what? We're still going to keep going forward. We're still going to keep going forward. We're still going to keep learning. Because only with that will we get to the other side together or get to this place where we can walk together. Yeah. Embrace that.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, Media. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. You will get an email with the recording, so please feel free to share that if you want to watch, or if for those that have missed it, you can absolutely pass it on. Thank you so much. Reach out if you have any questions, and best of luck on your indigenization journey. Thank you.